Welcome back into One on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show. I'm Andrew Gullotta here alongside Samantha Borer, and we are joined by a very special guest. He was a former starting pitcher for the New York Mets, and now he's the co-host of the Amazin But True Mets podcast. Nelson Figueroa, how you doing, Nelson?
I'm doing great. I tell you what, I'm almost as good as the Mets fans this offseason.
Yes, I could personally attest to that. And Nelson, I just want to jump right into talking about the Mets. And I know you know a thing or two about pitching and starting pitching, and the Mets obviously overhauled their entire rotation. I want to start off at the top. Obviously, the Mets lose Jacob deGrom to Texas, but they replace him with a big fish in their own right with Justin Verlander, reigning AL Cy Young winner. When you look at the top of the Mets rotation and the swap of deGrom to Verlander, how do you feel about that going into 2023 and then also maybe beyond that as well?
Yeah, I think if you were to tell Mets fans we're going to replace Jacob deGrom with some 40-year-old pitcher, they would have absolutely freaked out. There's no way you could let Jacob walk. There's no way that you can sign someone older than him and complain about Jacob's wear and tear. But this is Justin Verlander. He three-time Cy Young winner, just been rebuilt. He's been modded now with the new elbow ligament, Tommy John, and all. Took the proper amount of time to rehab. Took the proper amount of time to get himself to max effort levels, and the results showed last year. So I think Mets fans actually rejoiced in having someone like Justin Verlander to jump right in, and not the uncertainty of a Carlos Rodon. One of the best pitchers, undoubtedly, especially left-handed in baseball, but he was going to want a longer contract. So if you were going to be replacing Jacob deGrom for 2 to 3 years, then you did the proper thing with a 2 to 3 year deal with Justin Verlander, who looked last year as good as he ever has.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, just want to stick with the rotation for a second. The Mets also added, another huge ticket item. They added Kodai Senga for 5 years, 75 million with an opt out after 3 years. What do you think he adds to the rotation for this Mets team?
Unpredictability. This isn't just one of your average number three pitchers, especially after two, horses at the top. He doesn't have to be the guy to carry the load, which is great for someone coming over from Japan. We've seen that in the past where so many expectations were put on them. Shohei Ohtani, remember when he came over, they knew he was talented. They had no idea how talented he was. And so, he was able to kind of be under the radar with Pujols already there and Trout already there. And then all of a sudden you realize you had a once in a generational type player in Shohei Ohtani. Not saying that Senga's that exact breed, but what you're looking at is someone who has gotten better and better. His team has won 6 championships in the last 10 years in Japan. He tops out at 102 miles an hour. It's not that he sits at 102 like Jacob, but at the same time, for the price of only 15 million a year, you're getting someone with frontline ace type stuff and a forkball that has been deemed almost unhittable. And I was someone who dabbled with a forkball and loved throwing it because of the unpredictability of the forkball. Looks like the arm speed of a fastball. So while you're sitting back as a hitter, swinging for the fastball 98 to 100 miles an hour, all of a sudden this thing just kind of dies out 85, 86 to 88 and just drops straight down like a knuckleball. So consider it an R.A. Dickey knuckleball, but being thrown at almost 90 miles an hour. And you could understand why he has had such success with it. I'm extremely excited about him in that number three role. At the same time, once the contracts of the two aces expire, he's probably the guy that's going to carry the torch of the new Mets wave. And Shohei Ohtani's name, I don't think is the last you'll be hearing about in New York.
And you talk about that forkball. I think it was deemed the ghost forkball by
Yes.
people in Japan, which, I mean, as a Mets fan, you got to be happy about a pitch that's called, a ghost.
And you got it, but here's the thing, right? You also worry a little bit about Dice K had
Yeah,
the
that's true.
gyro ball, and we
Yeah.
always heard about this gyro ball, and they did research on it that showed all kinds of fun. 60 Minutes did a special
Yeah.
on it, and you're sitting there, and then you watch him pitch, and you're like, it doesn't do anything. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was the beauty of it. The beauty of it was that it spun like a slider, but it went straight.
Straight, yeah.
And once hitters realized, well, he doesn't really have a wipeout slider. slider. So when that thing starts spinning, it's really just a straight fastball and just sit back on it. So he didn't have the success that he had in Japan with that pitch. But I think undoubtedly because of that unpredictability of how a forkball moves, more knuckles. It's not something that does the same thing every single time once it comes out of his hand. I think that's really going to be the thing that takes him over the top with it. And it's just getting the adjustments of a different baseball, just the atmosphere, the crowd, just the style of pitching that he has being so different is going to be really exciting to be, especially in the middle of that rotation and for 5 years and that price, take it every time.
I think a lot of people talk about the kind of unpredictability of Kodai Senga compared to the predictability that Chris Bassitt would have brought in that number 3 spot, and kind of the trade-off between a guy in Senga who could project as an ace down the line, but also may, not even project as a starter in some other team's mind. There's definitely more of that uncertainty, where Bassitt, you kind of know what you're going to get out of him, going to be that 3 starter, going to give you a lot of innings like he did for the Mets last year and did previously with the Oakland Athletics. When you look at Senga and Bassitt, which, route would you have went with, if you're the Mets, a guy in Senga who they ultimately choose and have that higher upside, or a guy in Bassitt who's more of that predictable starter?
That's a great assessment there, but I am of the ilk that you have already enough dependability. You have enough certainty. You have enough within the first 2 guys, and even Carrasco, of what to expect, right? These guys have a long track record of what they've been able to do. Bassitt was a tremendous find last year, and not just a find, but a revelation of a guy who became better and better and was just consistent at what he was capable of doing. He wasn't overpowering, had a great 3 to 4 pitch mix. His slow curveball was what really set him apart from most pitchers in MLB right now. And I think if it's really, you're talking about a $5 million difference, and the upside of that $5 million and what it could be. And even if it winds up being, I don't know, if for some reason he has to be a reliever, you're looking at someone who can be a back end of the bullpen kind of reliever, because if you have a Tyler McGill, you have a Peterson, you can't really get them to give you the performances that you need. Senga, like I said, has been a reliever before as well. He can be that swing man, and I don't see it for $15 million, but I think the flexibility that he has done both jobs before gives you, an option down the line. And if for some reason in 3 years they want to trade Edwin Diaz, then you can slide him into a closer spot and he's only making 15 million as well.
Absolutely. I mean, sticking with you were just mentioning the relievers in that aspect of this team. They re-signed Edwin Diaz, as you just said. They traded for Brooks Laraley, signed David Robertson. The GM said he would stay engaged in the reliever market.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think is missing? What type of arm should they add there?
Well, I do like the lefty that came over from Tampa Bay, but I still think I want a little bit more from the left side. And I think another one, if you're talking about upside, Zach Britton, who has ties to Buck Showalter, would be a guy that would be a nice fit to bring along and let him find his way, so that by mid-season, he's feeling 100% and great, but you don't have to rush him along because of that. But I would take a flyer on someone like him. I think, I like the mix that they have, because they do have, again, unpredictability. Tampa Bay Rays, they churned out these relievers and these bullpens that were exceptional because they were, mid-90s fastball, some kind of other pitch that had ungodly movement, whether it be an unhittable changeup, a wipeout slider, all these different movements that you can mix and match. And the thing that Tampa Bay did better than most teams in baseball was they constantly flip them over. They would give them kind of a month and a half in the big leagues at the time, send them down, bring the next guy up, so that those reliever slots always were, at a major league minimum for the slot the whole year. It was as if, doesn't care who the name is, but that pitching slot of this, 6th, 7th, and even sometimes the 8th inning guy never wound up being the playoff guy that was the closer. Most of the time you heard about great stories, right? The closer wasn't even on the team. Yeah, he wasn't, because that spot is slated for guys, who throw between this 98 and 100, who have nasty movement on a secondary pitch, and they were interchangeable, and that's what I think Tampa Bay has done such a great job of. The new collective bargain agreement has put an end to that, because now you can only be sent down 2 times in one season before you have to be made a free agent. So that slows them down a little bit with doing that. So I think with the Mets, Of course, they're going to be still in the reliever market. The reliever market isn't so where you can't afford a $10 million contract here and there. David Robertson on a 1 year deal is a fantastic. Every 1 year deal is a fantastic deal if it works out, right? And so that's what you're looking at is you throw maybe a lot of things on the wall, see what comes back. I think they learned from last year. You can't just rely on a Joely Rodriguez to carry the load. They had a couple other guys, mixing and matching, filling in. They had good moments. They had more bad moments than good. But I think as you go through the long stretch of a season, that marathon of a season, you're going to have to find other guys. And maybe it might be in-house. I think Peterson found himself a little bit as a reliever. He had an uptick in velocity. You saw also with McGill. McGill had an uptick in velocity last year overall. And if you can kind of harness or really take care of his innings load early on in his career, then you're looking at him to take the mantle from one of those two big guys later on and still be able to have less wear and tear on his shoulder. It's kind of like that Seth Lugo thing where he could start, but he really helps us out in the bullpen in a major way. So I look at one of those two guys to be a factor as well.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting, especially when you look at maybe a little bit of the rumors going around with trading Carlos Carrasco and kind of putting McGill or Peterson into that starter spot compared to if you kept Carrasco, you could either move McGill or Peterson, whatever one kind of projects better in the bullpen. You give them a full off season, a full spring training in the bullpen, which, would help them, kind of get into that role a little quicker maybe than last year when they were kind of thrusted in the middle of it.
Yeah, that's not easy. That's one of the things that as a guy who you bust your butt as a starter down in the minor leagues and you're pacing yourself for these 7 inning to 9 inning starts. That was always the bar, right? I want to go 7. A quality starter with 6 innings, 3 earned runs or less, but I want to be a little bit better than that so that, I'd be somebody who could get picked up by any team and just kind of plugged right in. And then you get to the big leagues and they're like, well, we don't really have room for you. So we can either send you down to the minor leagues or you could become a reliever. Well, the first couple of times I was like, well, send me back down. I know I'm going to keep starting. I know I can start in the major leagues. And then the next couple of times it was like, all right, don't send me anywhere. I'll figure this out. I'll treat it as if it's my start. It was just a mental thing of the only time I'm going to pitch is if we're losing. And I remember my first couple of years, it was very hard to wrap your head around that. It was either an injury or if you were losing. That was the only reason that you were going to get into a game. And I would go sometimes 19 games without pitching. And you're sitting around and you're working on your craft and you're playing catch and you're throwing bullpens and you're just trying to be available every single day. But you knew once you got past the 5th inning, things are really kind of mapped out. The 6th inning guy, 7th inning guy, lefty on left guy, and then 8th and 9th. And so unless you went extra innings, you weren't going to pitch either. So it makes it a little more difficult. I think you saw that from somebody like Trevor Williams last year, how he bounced back and forth. And once he got his regular routine of, okay, I'm starting, I know what I'm doing for the next 4 days, and then I'm starting again, you had some nice spot starts out of him, down that stretch. And, a guy like Joey Lucchesi, he's another one who's back in the mix as well, who he's probably going to start out in AAA. And I think that was one of the great things they got when they traded for him from San Diego, is that he was only 26 years old. So he's sitting back here. He's still on the younger side, and he's going to be able to give you some innings, and whether he starts out in AAA and just to keep him stretched out, but to be that first option, which that was another thing, right? I'm the 26th man. Woo-hoo. But you're waiting for an injury. You're waiting for someone to underperform. And it's a tough thing to wrap your head around because you bond with a lot of these guys, right? You bond with the pitching staff. You guys are working hard at spring training and you're trying to make this team. And all of a sudden now I'm not sitting down in AAA rooting for their demise, but at the same time, I'm like, man, when am I going to get my shot? So the mental part of it is more than anything. I think the physical part, if you have the right coaching staff, they can keep you ready. They can keep you, as mentally prepared as possible for when that opportunity comes. And what you never know when it comes. Mine, happened to be a few times where a guy like John Neese, when he blew out his hamstring, I had pitched 2 days before and got knocked around by the Diamondbacks, and I thought I was gone. And next thing I know, Neese pulls his hamstring. 2 days later, I jump into the ball game. I think I went either 4 2/3 or 5 innings of relief. And we won the ball game. And, Jerry Manuel said to me afterwards, how happy he was for me to have that opportunity. And again, it was an opportunity created because of something bad that happened, but it was, I was always prepared. I think one of my coaches had said early on in my career, luck is when opportunity meets preparation. And so I was able to make the most of that. I think most guys have to find that moment and then ride it out from there. It's Wally Pipp, basically 2.0.
Absolutely. And so I know that there's a lot of off season yet to be had. Obviously, we have a while until baseball begins again once more. I mean, what would you grade the Mets off season so far? How do you feel about what's been done, what Buck has been doing?
It's hard. It's hard not to grade it. I mean, an A. You could either go A plus or A minus between what else happens, what other little moves are made. If nothing else happened, it's still an A for me. I mean, there's no way you can say that they got worse. There's no way that you could say they haven't gotten better. I think there's a multitude of things that could still shake out. I think I like the lineup. I like the length in the lineup. I do think if they were able to add a DH guy and JD Martinez name jumps off the page at you, because he's a guy that can hit you 30 quite calmly. He's starting to move into that Nelson Cruz phase of his career, where the bat can still play no matter what, and then having a universal DH, I think he would be a tremendous fit. Taking a flyer on someone, a familiar face like Michael Conforto on a 1-year deal, just to see where he's at, because there was always that 30 home run potential in that bat. A year off of maybe the wear and tear on his body and him being in hopefully the best shape of his career. You take a flyer on that. You don't overpay on it. I mean, Cody Bellinger, I was clamoring for. I just felt like Cody Bellinger would be a pick to click, right? A guy, former MVP, rookie of the year, so many different things, and he goes to Chicago. You're looking for one other move like that to help that competition level rise up. I love the fact that the bar, even last year when they went Cyber Monday shopping and they got all three guys, Escobar, Marte, and Canna, the bar that was set between the starters and the non-starters, we used to always call it the B squad. You had the A squad and the B squad. When you had the split squad games, the A squad stayed at home and the B squad went on the road. Now all of a sudden it's like when you go split on the road and that team gets there and they're in spring training and you're like, oh my God, there's nothing but stars still. There's familiar names. There's guys who played on the All-Star team. This isn't just some random guys. I think that's what New York baseball has been always about, especially in the Bronx. You've seen that, and now that the names on the uniform kind of match that caliber of what you want for the name on the front of the uniform. And that's always been the most important thing. I think that's why the Yankees never had their names on the back, is that you always played for the name on the front. So I think there's spending and there's also smart spending. I think the Mets have spent really, really smart so far this year because of the way that they've mapped it out over the next 2 years. Each one of those guys has an option for a third kind of thing. And, you get to reset, say in 2 years, if it's not working out, where, San Diego has done this thing kind of every third year. Remember that first year that San Diego came to be with the new GM, and he put a team of just all stars together. And by June, they were like, all right, blow it all up. Mm-hmm. And they blew it all up, and they went and got prospects, and they wound up staying relevant, and because it's a very difficult division with the Dodgers on top. So I see the Mets being the same way, but it hasn't gotten any easier for the Mets in the National League East either. Yeah. So you've got to either find a way to keep up with the Joneses or be the Joneses.
I could really talk about the Mets all day, Nelson, but I just have one final question for you. This team finished with obviously 101 wins last season. Obviously disappointing finish in the wild card round, but they brought back or at least replaced a lot of the holes that they've had this season. We'll see. Maybe they can add, another type of DH, fourth outfielder type, as you said, like Michael Conforto or a JD Martinez. But how close do you think this team will come to that 101 win total and get back to the playoffs? Do you obviously 101 wins is very, very tough to get to, but how are you thinking about this team to even get to, like, let's say 95 wins, 90 to maybe in that range?
So I think honestly for me 94, 95 wins is going to be the low bar. I just think this team has gotten better all the way around. I think now, certain players like to know that they're going to be somewhere for a while. So Edwin Diaz, realizing he's not going anywhere and he's valued. He had a tremendous season. Do I think it's an Aaron Loop, 1 year under a 1 ERA and, that's it. That's all you ever get out of him? No, I think he's going to continue to be the best closer in baseball. I think the reliability of having someone every fifth day, like a Justin Verlander, is going to pay huge dividends. I think everything has now been stretched. The starting pitching, the middle relief, the back end, of course, you can afford to have one more guy. I think the lineup, knowing that, they have this level of pitching is going to be able to kind of do their thing that they did last year. Instead of swinging for the long ball, they put the ball in play, made things happen. Remember, the shift is banned this year, so there's going to be a lot more those contact hits that they had last year are going to become even more valuable, because then you do have more opportunities for RBIs for guys like Lindor and Alonso. And that's scary, because look at the numbers that they put up last year. So I'm really excited for this team up and down. I think, Buck in his second year, it's hard to imagine you can improve on a 101 win season, but you can, right? You didn't have Jacob deGrom for most of the year. You didn't have, you didn't have Scherzer for a bit of the year, a third of the year. He was out with injuries. So I think there's no longer that panic of what happens if, because it's already happened to them as a whole. So they've experienced this together. I think what we've learned about the playoffs, and especially the playoffs, with the extended playoffs and more teams being in, man, once you get in, you got to be on your A game. You can't take a breath. You can't relax. You can't. I think every team that kind of, especially like the Dodgers, they had an unbelievable season, 110 wins, and they sat back and they took a deep breath, and all of a sudden San Diego was on them. And those teams stay hungry. They've been playing playoff baseball just to get in to the playoffs. So I think that urgency has to start a little sooner. And it all comes down to these performances. This is why those guys get paid the big bucks, and now you have two guys, and especially somebody like Max Scherzer, he wants a do-over from last year big time, and I think he's going to get that opportunity to do it and go a lot further.
The former pitcher of the New York Mets and co-host of the Amazin But True Mets podcast, Nelson Figueroa. Thanks for joining us, Nelson.
You got it. Thank you very much, guys.